For investors new to Ilika, how do you explain what problem your solid-state batteries solve compared with today's lithium-ion cells?
Well, in a nutshell, people are interested in better batteries. And if you put it in the context of an EV, I think it's relatively easy to understand because, in that context, you're interested in a less expensive vehicle. So the batteries should be cheaper or enable a cheaper vehicle. Secondly, you want the vehicle to go further on a single charge, so lighter and more powerful batteries. And then thirdly, if you do need to charge it, you want to be able to do it quickly. So, these are the three key benefits actually that people are looking for. And often they're the reasons why people haven't bought an EV already, right? Because they're worried about one of those three parameters, maybe all three.
You operate both Stereax and Goliath product lines. Why did you choose to target these two very different markets?
Yes, the principal reason is that as we've been developing solid-state battery technology and productizing it, we've been very keen to make sure there's a fit between the product that we know that we can deliver reproducibly and at an attractive price point and the application. And the first batteries that we produced were miniature solid-state batteries, and they are particularly useful for active implantable medical devices that need a small and powerful energy source. And on the other hand, if you look at the advantages of our Goliath large format batteries, they're a great fit with EVs because of the safety that allows you to engineer in all sorts of other benefits into the vehicle, the lightweighting opportunity, and the fact that you can charge that EV more rapidly.
Solid-state batteries are a crowded field. What genuinely differentiates Ilika's technology from competitors chasing the same goals?
Well, actually, I would contest that solid-state batteries for miniature batteries for medical devices is a crowded field. I think there's very little competition for our Stereax batteries because hardly anybody else has managed to miniaturize solid-state batteries to the extent that we've been able to do and still retain a powerful format. On the other hand, I would agree that for EVs there is a lot of development going into solid-state batteries, but there are lots of choices around the material set that you can down select for your particular device. And we've chosen materials that enable a battery that can be made using standard gigafactory processes, so people don't have to totally refit their factories, but also a battery that confers benefits on the user and the pack designer so that you can get a competitive performance. And then finally, actually, that the batteries can be recycled.
Your business model is licensing-led rather than building gigafactories. Why is that the right approach for Ilika and its shareholders?
Yes, really two reasons. First of all, culture, and secondly, capital. So what do I mean by culture? Ilika is a company that is a set of experts in the development of solid-state batteries. So we're great developers of new product. But it needs a very different culture to manufacture at scale. Lean Six Sigma, Kaizen, continuous improvement, a ruthless determination to drive down margins, totally different mindset to the research and development mindset that our team has got. And then secondly, capital. Ilika was set up as a company to develop innovative new products. Entirely equity funded, listed on AIM. In reality, it hasn't got the right capital structure to build gigafactories. My rule of thumb is that you get about 1 gigawatt hour per year of capacity for every $100 million that you invest in your factory. So effectively, a gigafactory is more like a utility investment where you need structured finance, maybe a little bit of equity up front, but a lot of debt. And you need a totally different approach to growing the business.
You've now started shipping Stereax M300 prototypes, and you've also announced your first purchase order. Why is this such an important commercial milestone for the company?
Well, these are indicators that we are at the point where we have a minimum viable product, an MVP. And the fact we're shipping product to customers and then following that up with an announcement that we've got an order for more electrodes to support product growth, I think is really encouraging.
Who are the early customers for Stereax, and what kind of feedback really matters at this stage?
The customers that we've got for Stereax actually span a wide range from very large multinationals all the way through to innovative SMEs. And these are active in sectors that include smart orthopedics, neurostimulation or nerve stimulation as it's sometimes called, implanted sensors for measuring things like blood pressure and oxygen concentration in blood, ophthalmics, and also orthodontics. So some really exciting applications.
The addressable market for active implantable medical devices is large. What needs to happen for Stereax to move from prototypes to recurring royalties?
What we're going to see over the next couple of years really is a transition from being a component into an integrated and key part of a medical device. And the steps that people can look out for are, first of all, integration into a power management platform where you have the battery management chip, you have the power delivery electronics, and maybe you have a communication device integrated into that technology platform. And then a customer of ours, a customer of our manufacturing partners, Cirtec, will take that platform and integrate it into their device, and then they'll get regulatory approval for that device that they will brand and sell, and volumes will ramp. And as we go through that volume, we will move from the initial profit share through to a royalty sharing model.
How important is the Cirtec medical manufacturing agreements in de-risking scale-up and customer adoption?
Cirtec is really, in many respects, the perfect partner for us. First of all, they have a technology base that is very similar to the thin film technology that Stereax relies on for its manufacturing. Secondly, they are just a manufacturing, they are a manufacturing focused company, and they've got a great reputation as being a manufacturing partner for OEMs. And then thirdly, they've got very strong relationships with the medical device OEMs, particularly in the US, which is really the spiritual home of a lot of the larger medical device companies. So they've got established customer relationships. So, that whole supply chain is already in place.
Turning to Goliath, you're now shipping 10 amp hour prototypes with much higher capacity. What does that step change mean for automotive partners?
Well, by moving from our previous prototypes, which were 2 amp hours, to our latest prototypes, which are 10 amp hours, we've suddenly moved into a zone of increased credibility where we're producing cells that are powerful enough, have enough capacity, that they can be integrated into modules and packs. If, for instance, we take existing cylindrical cells in the industry, they, if you used a 21700 format, so apologies for the jargon, but this is what the industry uses as a standard reference for a certain size of cylindrical cell. These are often between 5 and 10 amp hours of capacity. So by having a pouch cell that's got 10 amp hours of capacity, you're suddenly in a comparable zone, and people can start engineering that cell into a battery pack.
You've highlighted safety, weight, and cost benefits. How compelling is the data you're seeing compared with incumbent lithium-ion solutions?
So we commissioned a consultancy called Balance Batteries to take the data that we were able to demonstrate from our cells and work out what the effect would be on a battery pack in a typical EV. And the result that they came up with was that they were able to save £2,500, so what, $3,000 for those of you watching in colour. They were able to save that from the battery pack cost. They were able to get a 20% weight saving, which then translates into a longer range for the vehicle. And then thirdly, they were able to take a third off the charge time that battery pack would need with a standard lithium-ion cell. So a drop from 18 minutes down to 12 minutes.
The automated pilot line has achieved 93% yield. Why is manufacturing yield such a critical inflection point for investors?
So manufacturing yield is so important at gigafactory scale. Gigafactories don't make any money unless they have a yield of at least 90%. Often when you're doing a tech transfer, the gigafactory operator, before they would really contemplate taking a license to a pilot line or transferring that pilot line technology into the gigafactory, they would look for at pilot line scale a yield of about 80%, just to give them comfort that they could then continue to improve on that at scale and get up to 90. If you don't operate above 90% in a gigafactory, then you lose money hand over fist, and there have been some very high profile failures in the industry in 2024 and 2025 because that threshold was not crossed. So the fact we're able to get such a high yield, 93% on our automated pilot line, gives customers a lot of comfort that we have a process which is transferable.
You've also produced early 50 amp hour cells. What milestones need to be hit before automotive customers are ready for A and B samples?
Well, the conversations that we're having with customers right now are around minimum viable product. What's the MVP that they need to be able to go into production and start to sell product to their customers? In the past, we've said that is probably around 50 amp hours. Frankly, we're seeing a lot of interest in our 10 amp hour format. We don't really mind the size of the pouch. We have got them ready to go. It's all about the economics and the module design, the pack design, and the integration into the vehicle. So as soon as we get that MVP agreed and somebody is excited enough to want to then take the next step, like the step that Cirtec took with us for Stereax, then we will continue with our commercialization and move into that licensing model.
The Primed program brings in Jaguar Land Rover, UK BIC and Oxford University. What does that level of involvement say about Ilika's credibility?
Well, I think as an organization we have a lot of credibility with high profile players in the industry, not only the OEMs like Jaguar Land Rover, who are interested enough to steer that program and give us advice on our technology roadmap, but also, leading academics who are highly respected in the field, like Professor Paul Shearing at Oxford University, who's part of this, and also working together with the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre is really supporting our scale up and a demonstration of the scalability of our technology. So you may remember an earlier program that we called History, where we were working together with UK BIC and able to demonstrate that we could coat on an electrode, we could coat our solid state electrolyte very effectively. So they've supported us through that journey, and now of course in Primed they're working together with us in order to produce larger quantities of electrode and coated electrode for our battery manufacturing.
How does Primed bridge the gap between pilot scale success and true gigafactory scale manufacturing?
Well, the deliverables of Primed are quite exciting. First of all, they allow us to develop our A sample, and an A sample is really just the automotive's nomenclature for a minimum viable product. And once you get to A sample, you prove that you can make a product to a given specification. The industry also has B samples and C samples. B sample is where you take that same product, but you make it on industrially ready equipment, so typically much larger equipment. And then C samples are where you start to go into production. You have a limited production run of that same product, perhaps on the same equipment that you made your B samples on. Going through to A sample gets us off to the races, really. The other thing that we can do in that program is that we are doing some modeling of the production process so that we've got a compelling economic model for manufacturing at scale. And then thirdly, actually, we're doing a bit of a business case review together with HSSMI, which is one of the partners in that program.
Over the next 12 to 24 months, what should investors watch as the key proof points that ILIKF is moving from development to commercial reality?
Yeah, so specifically for Goliath, first of all, I think there's some very exciting proof points. We will get some feedback from customers relating to the performance of the 10 amp hour prototypes that we released at the end of 2025. Almost in the same way, actually, that we got some feedback from customers who tested the 2 amp hour cells that we released in 2024. So that's all something to look out for. Secondly, some feedback on the application of our technology for a minimum viable product. So when do you say, actually, we've now defined that minimum viable product, and we want to go ahead and scale that up. And then thirdly, perhaps for Goliath, some licensing discussions similar to what we've achieved for Stereax.
Stepping back, what does success look like for ILIKF at the end of the decade, and where do you see the biggest value being created?
I think by the end of the decade, what we would like to see, what we anticipate, what we're planning for, is that we've got 2 product lines in production. That we've got Stereax that is ramped up and is in a number of products that are, if not already at approval, then going through that FDA approval process. And that the volumes of revenue associated with that are self-sustaining as an organization. And then on the Goliath side, that we've already been through that tech transfer process, that we've licensed it, and we're in manufacturing, and actually maybe you and I can buy an EV that's got an ILIKF solid-state battery in.